At the annual company party, my wife, pregnant with her assistant's child, screamed at me, "You live in son-in-law, you're worthless. Keeping you around was charity." Then she turned around and signed the marriage license with her assistant, even waving the marriage certificate in my face. His in-laws sat by, enjoying the spectacle, saying, "A dependent son-in-law is just a backup." After they forced me to leave with nothing, and after I returned and took control of my family's business, I used a predatory contract to make my ex-wife suffer a miscarriage and die in prison. The assistant went mad, and her parents committed suicide. Kevin Davis, don't joke around. Everything you have was given to you by Hayes Enterprises. You actually think you can make Hayes Enterprises go bankrupt? At that moment, Victoria Tory Hayes looked at me, laughing wildly. Originally, I wanted to save you some face. After all, my parents said your capabilities were decent, that we should let you manage Hayes Enterprises and work yourself to the bone for us. But I actually think Kevin will do a much better job than you. So, today, Ethan Miller, I'm divorcing you. Get out of the company. Victoria Tory Hayes looked at me, sneering. Ethan Miller, when you married into our family, you signed an agreement with the Millers. If I want a divorce, you must accept it unconditionally and leave with nothing. I looked at Victoria Tory Hayes, then turned to my in-laws, Patrick Hayes and Eleanor Hayes, behind her. They kept their heads down, silent, but the expressions on their faces clearly showed their approval of the situation. The colleagues around us were whispering, but no one stepped forward to speak up. In fact, even now, they were enjoying my downfall. I knew they completely looked down on me, as a dependent son-in-law. It was just that my abilities had earned them a lot of money, which was why they had allowed me to become the company's CEO. In all the years I had married into the Hayes family, I had poured my heart and soul into Hayes Enterprises, expanding it from a small company into the publicly traded company it was today. As the company's business steadily grew, Victoria Tory Hayes had volunteered to go overseas. Now, she had returned, but she was like this. At that moment, I looked at Victoria Tory Hayes in front of me, and Kevin Davis behind her. I smiled faintly and said, "Fine, if you want a divorce, then let's get one." The moment I finished speaking, Kevin Davis, standing behind Victoria Tory Hayes, immediately broke into a smile. He pulled Tory closer and said, "Tory, from now on, I'll definitely help you manage the company well." Upon hearing this, Victoria Tory Hayes gave Kevin Davis a radiant smile. I looked at Victoria Tory Hayes' smile, my eyes filled with bitterness. She had never smiled at me like that. Even after I had given up everything for her, even marrying into the Hayes family, I still hadn't earned Victoria Tory Hayes' genuine affection. "Ethan Miller, I've already prepared the divorce agreement. Sign it, and tomorrow we'll go to the county clerk's office to get the divorce certificate." She held out an agreement to me, her eyes cold as she spoke. I glanced at the divorce agreement and smiled faintly. The terms of the agreement were simple. I would leave with nothing, unable to take even a single item. I looked at Victoria Tory Hayes before me. These past few years of marriage, I had dedicated myself wholeheartedly to her family, only to end up with this result. I signed it without hesitation, then looked at Victoria Tory Hayes and said, "I'll wait for you at the county clerk's office tomorrow morning." After saying that, I walked directly out of the conference hall. Haha, that guy's finally gone. Usually we had to call him CEO, and he'd order us around so much. Now it's great. He's gone, and Ms. Hayes' family is in charge of the company. From now on, we'll have good days. I heard that Ms. Hayes' family is good to us and gives us lots of benefits. But that dependent son-in-law, he exploited us everywhere, just because he was the company's CEO. Exactly, that kind of person is just twisted. He deserved to be dumped by Ms. Hayes. As I walked out of the conference hall, I heard a few colleagues from the company whispering, and I couldn't help but show a bitter smile. They had no idea that those benefits they spoke of were something I had fought for with all my might on their behalf. If it weren't for me, they would have been much worse off. Patrick Hayes and Eleanor Hayes were inherently stingy, with a personality that would exploit employees to the fullest. If I hadn't argued my case, even guaranteeing them that I could take the company public, Patrick Hayes and Eleanor Hayes wouldn't have even been willing to give the employees those small benefits. But because of this, they were exceptionally dissatisfied with me. That's also why, when Victoria Tory Hayes said she wanted to divorce me, and even brought Kevin Davis back, they welcomed it. In their eyes, the company was already running smoothly now. How could anything go wrong? As for me, I was disposable. After leaving the conference hall, I made a phone call. "I'm divorced," I said into the phone. "I told you long ago that you'd definitely divorce Victoria Tory Hayes. After all, you've known about Victoria Tory Hayes and Kevin Davis for years now." The voice on the other end of the phone said, "If that's the case, then come home." Also, over these past few years, we've set up so many traps for Hayes Enterprises. Once you and Victoria Tori Hayes are divorced and you officially resign, we'll begin our operations. I said, Dad, I'm ready to return to the family estate. What Victoria Tori Hayes didn't know was that a few years ago, my biological parents had found me, even hoping I would divorce Victoria Tori Hayes and return to inherit the family business. However, at that time, I was deeply in love with Victoria Tori Hayes and refused my parents, so they left disappointed. A few months later, my biological parents found me again. They handed me some documents, photos of Victoria Tori Hayes and Kevin Davis, showing them incredibly intimate overseas. So, 2 years ago, I actually already knew about Victoria Tori Hayes and Kevin Davis. But even then, I still loved Victoria Tori Hayes. I even thought she might change her mind. However, I also understood the Hayes family members' personalities. Therefore, a few years ago, I began to lay out my plans. As long as the Hayes family treated me poorly, I naturally had a way to deal with them. Now that I said I was returning to the family estate, my parents were naturally delighted. Dad even wanted to come pick me up personally, but I refused, telling him that I would handle the matters with Hayes Enterprises myself. Okay. On the other end of the phone, Dad said, Ethan Miller, I'm waiting for you to come home. You've been away from us for too long. Our family business will all be yours in the future. Why did you need to marry into that family? Once you're back home, Dad will find you a suitable wife. The next morning, I waited for Victoria Tori Hayes at the county clerk's office. She was holding Kevin Davis' hand. When she saw me, Victoria Tori Hayes sneered, Ethan Miller, look at yourself now. How can you compare to Kevin Davis? Kevin is younger and more capable than you. After the company was handed over to Kevin yesterday, he signed a major contract. From now on, the company will only get better. Do you really think the company won't function without you? I listened to Victoria Tori Hayes' words and smiled faintly. After all, I knew that deal very well. It was a business deal I had negotiated, and I'd always felt there was something wrong with it. The client demanded a very tight deadline, and there was no way we could produce enough products within such a short time. And if anything went wrong, it would result in a sky-high breach of contract penalty. No normal company would ever take on that deal. But I never expected Victoria Tori Hayes and Kevin Davis to actually dare to accept it. At that moment, watching them gloat in front of me, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. They had no idea that if this deal wasn't handled properly, it would cripple Hayes Enterprises. But what did that have to do with me? After Victoria Tori Hayes and I signed the divorce agreement, I turned around and saw Victoria Tori Hayes pulling Kevin Davis to the side. They immediately signed the marriage license. Holding the marriage certificate, Victoria Tori Hayes even walked up to me and boasted, Ethan Miller, from now on, I'm Kevin Davis' wife. As for you, a dependent son-in-law, you probably won't even find a decent job in the future. I ignored Victoria Tori Hayes and turned to walk out of the county clerk's office. Behind me, Kevin Davis looked at me, smiling smugly. Mr. Miller, the company colleagues asked me to pass along a message. They said you're worthless and only know how to suck up. Your leaving is great for the company. I turned and glanced at Kevin Davis. He was gloating. I smiled faintly and said, okay. I understand. There was no need for me to get angry with someone like him. At that moment, I felt remarkably calm. As I walked out of the county clerk's office, I saw a luxury car parked by the roadside. The person who got out of the car was Dad's secretary. I had met her a few times. This time, Dad had sent her to pick me up as well. When she saw me, she proactively opened the car door for me. Mr. Miller, the president is already waiting for your return at the family estate. Sarah Jenkins said softly, looking at me. I nodded, preparing to get into the car and leave, but then Victoria Tori Hayes' voice came from behind me. Ethan Miller, you've learned to put on quite a show now. Do you think renting a luxury car and hiring an actress to perform will make me regret anything? Listening to the voice behind me, I turned to look at Victoria Tori Hayes. At that moment, she was holding Kevin Davis, looking at me triumphantly. Ethan Miller, just think about it. You're an orphan. You have no money at all. All these years, you made so much money for my family, but you didn't even get a single penny yourself. How could you possibly afford a luxury car like that? I smiled, saying nothing. At this point, I couldn't be bothered to continue talking with Victoria Tori Hayes. Seeing that I didn't respond and simply got into the car, preparing to leave, Victoria Tori Hayes grew angry. She looked at me and said, Ethan Miller, did you spend all your money renting that car? What are you going to do now? If you starve to death on the street, don't you dare call our family for help. I turned to Victoria Tori Hayes. At that moment, she was still looking at me with an arrogant expression. And I, looking at Victoria Tory Hayes, smiled and said, "Don't worry. From now on, I definitely won't come to your family. But if you ever run into trouble in the future, don't come begging me for help either." The moment my words fell, Victoria Tory Hayes suddenly yelled, "Ethan Miller, look at yourself. What right do you have now to make our family beg you? Do you really think our family can't survive without you? Let me tell you, Ethan Miller, Kevin is far more capable than you. With Kevin around, Hayes Enterprises will only get better and better. As for you, you're just a piece of trash, useless your entire life." Listening to her constant belittling, I just smiled and remained silent. I had heard words like these too many times over the years. Even after I took over Hayes Enterprises, and its business was practically booming, Patrick Hayes and Eleanor Hayes would still constantly belittle me. I knew they were afraid I would have other ideas, so they tried every possible way to demean me, to make me feel like they could still control me. Now, with Victoria Tory Hayes back, their entire family had simply abandoned me. 4 years of marriage, during which I had poured my heart and soul into Hayes Enterprises, ultimately resulted in this. I stopped paying attention to Victoria Tory Hayes and had Sarah Jenkins drive me to the family estate. After returning to the family estate, Dad and Mom were exceptionally happy. Dad told me he had already prepared everything for me and had me take over most of the company's business. Dad told me that finding me again was enough for him and Mom, and from now on, they planned to retire, entrusting the company to me. With Dad's help, I quickly took over most of the company's business and developed the company exceptionally well. That day, however, I received a phone call from Victoria Tory Hayes. "Ethan Miller, where are you?" The moment the call connected, I heard Victoria Tory Hayes' voice. It sounded extremely urgent. "Ms. Hayes, what does my whereabouts have to do with you?" I smiled faintly. I knew there must be problems with some of the deals at Victoria Tory Hayes' company. And now, Victoria Tory Hayes simply had no ability to solve them. As for Kevin Davis, I knew how capable he was even when he was an intern. It was even more impossible for him to resolve these issues now. Victoria Tory Hayes sounded extremely urgent. "Ethan Miller, get back to the company immediately." "Ms. Hayes, have you forgotten? I've already resigned from your company, and we're divorced. I have no obligation to go to your company, do I?" I said coldly. "Ethan Miller, I'm just worried you won't have food to eat, so I'm giving you a chance." Over the phone, Victoria Tory Hayes' voice was clearly urgent and desperate. "No need, Ms. Hayes. I'm doing very well now, so don't trouble yourself, Ms. Hayes." After saying that, I prepared to hang up the phone. But the next moment, over the phone, Victoria Tory Hayes urgently yelled, "Ethan Miller, the contracts you signed before are problematic. Do you believe I'll sue you for damaging the company's interests?" Victoria Tory Hayes on the other end of the phone was practically screaming in exasperation. "Ms. Hayes, I've already resigned. If you want to sue me, I have no objections," I said coldly into the phone. As for Victoria Tory Hayes threatening to sue me, I didn't take it to heart at all. The contracts I signed wouldn't have problems. Furthermore, most of the contracts had already been completed before Victoria Tory Hayes returned. Ever since I took over the company's business, I had also contacted several long-standing clients. They told me that after Victoria Tory Hayes took over the company, she didn't value them, and even raised their prices. Left with no choice, they had to seek new suppliers. And I happened to become their supplier. So, those former clients of Hayes Enterprises were now still my clients. Since my long-standing clients were all here, how could the contracts I signed previously have any problems? On the other end of the phone, Victoria Tory Hayes was clearly too furious to speak. I could even hear her heavy breathing. "Ethan Miller, I order you to come here right now," Victoria Tory Hayes screamed exasperatedly. I, however, smiled faintly and said, "I'm sorry, Ms. Hayes, I'm currently out of town and can't come over. As for the problems your company is facing, I can't solve them either. If you believe there were issues during my tenure as CEO, then you can sue me anytime." After saying that, without even waiting for Victoria Tory Hayes' reaction, I hung up the phone directly. After hanging up the phone, I continued to focus on the work at hand. Ever since returning to the family estate, Dad had practically handed over most of the business deals to me. Even the company's shares had been transferred to me. Now, I was the company's true person in control. After taking over the company, I was swamped with work. How could I have time to deal with Victoria Tory Hayes' affairs? So, at that moment, I couldn't be bothered with Victoria Tory Hayes. I hadn't expected that just an hour later, I would receive a phone call from Patrick Hayes. "Ethan Miller, the company has run into a bit of trouble and needs your presence." On the other end of the phone, Patrick Hayes said, chuckling, "Why don't you come back for a visit?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes, I'm too busy. I don't have time to go back," I said coldly. Upon hearing me say that, Patrick Hayes on the other end of the phone quickly said, "Ethan Miller, I know Victoria Tory Hayes went too far with this, but you also have to understand Victoria Tory Hayes. After all, the person she truly loves isn't you. How about this, as long as you come back, I guarantee I'll keep a position for you at the company." Patrick Hayes on the other end of the phone pleaded with me earnestly. However, listening to Patrick Hayes' words, at that moment, all I wanted to do was laugh. I knew Hayes Enterprises must be facing quite a few problems, some even serious. Otherwise, Patrick Hayes wouldn't have sought me out so eagerly. But now, I couldn't be bothered with him. "Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry, I'm really busy right now and don't have time to work for Hayes Enterprises," I said coldly into the phone. Since they had already made me leave, why would they want me back? "Ethan Miller, how much could you possibly earn working outside? You know your education and background, without connections or qualifications. You can only do small jobs out there. Now, Hayes Enterprises is willing to give you a chance, you should cherish it." Patrick Hayes continued to persuade me, but I listened to Patrick Hayes' words and smiled coldly. He had no idea how much the company I now controlled was worth. Compared to Hayes Enterprises, the wealth I commanded now was far greater. Seeing I was unmoved, Richard Sterling grew even more anxious. At that moment, he even spoke directly to me, saying, "Ethan, Victoria still likes you, actually. If you just come back, I promise Victoria will divorce Chadwick Sterling and marry you again." I listened to Richard Sterling's words and smiled. They always assume they can just dictate terms, believing their word is enough. But now, as for me, I had long lost any interest in Victoria Sterling. In fact, there was only deep disgust. Seeing I didn't speak, Richard Sterling became even more frantic and began to urge me constantly. "Mr. Sterling, I'm really busy. Besides, I don't have time to work at your company. The company's situation now has nothing to do with me anymore." After I finished speaking, I immediately hung up the phone. I had no interest in continuing to talk with anyone from the Sterling family. I thought that after I had refused so decisively, the Sterling family wouldn't bother me again. But I hadn't expected that only 3 days later, Victoria Sterling's phone rang again. "Ethan Miller, you get back here immediately. It's because of you that the company is a complete mess now. If you don't come back, I'll sue you, claiming you deliberately caused our company to lose money." Hearing her words, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Miss Sterling, everything I've done at the company over the years has been with a clear conscience. If Miss Sterling wants to sue me, then I'll await the subpoena from the courthouse." After I finished speaking, I immediately hung up the phone. At this point, I couldn't be bothered to talk to Victoria Sterling any longer. Immediately after, I went ahead and blocked all phone numbers for Victoria Sterling and her family, because I knew they would definitely keep bothering me. I asked Olivia Davis to investigate what had happened to the Sterling family that they were so desperate now. Olivia Davis hurried off, and only half an hour later, she returned and reported the situation to me. "Mr. Miller, the Sterling family had previously signed an agreement that explicitly stated if the contract couldn't be fulfilled, they would have to pay 3 times the original contract value in compensation. Ever since you left the Sterling family, Chadwick Sterling signed that agreement. The other parties saw that Chadwick Sterling knew nothing, and even included many hidden clauses in the contract. Chadwick Sterling had no idea the delivery time was so tight, and simply signed it. By the time they realized it now, they had no way to deliver the goods." Listening to Olivia Davis' words, I understood. Clearly, Chadwick Sterling had caused too big a problem, and the Sterling family had no solution. Now, they could only think of me. In the eyes of anyone from the Sterling family, I definitely had a solution. If not, then I would be a perfect scapegoat. They might even want me to go to jail in place of Chadwick Sterling and Victoria Sterling. Even though I had long known this was how anyone from the Sterling family was towards me, now, hearing these things, I still felt a wave of powerlessness. "Keep a close eye on the Sterling family's movements." I thought for a moment and instructed Olivia Davis. "Mr. Miller, you're not still thinking of helping the Sterling family, are you?" Hearing this, Olivia Davis looked at me with some surprise. "No, Sterling Enterprises was built by me, from the ground up. I know it has some good assets. If the Sterling family goes bankrupt, we can acquire those valuable assets." Hearing this, I replied. After all, it was a company I had worked so hard to build. How could I possibly abandon it? Seeing I had no intention of helping Victoria Sterling, Olivia Davis finally breathed a sigh of relief and hurried off to get things done. Meanwhile, I continued with my work. That day, I was still working when I received a phone call from the courthouse. They informed me that Victoria Sterling had indeed sued me. She accused me of business fraud, impersonating Chadwick Sterling, and signing an unfulfillable contract. When I heard that, I was even a little surprised. Chadwick Sterling signed that contract. What did it have to do with me? That entire family had even prepared to pin the blame on me. At that moment, I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. I told the courthouse staff that I had never signed that contract, and furthermore, I had already resigned at that time. They asked me to come to the courthouse to discuss it. I could only agree. I knew they were forcing me to return. After all, if I received a subpoena from the courthouse and didn't go back, it would be taken as an admission. Left with no choice, I had to go back. When Olivia Davis learned of the situation, she said she would go back with me, and also hired a significant security team. Mr. Miller, you are very important to the company now. We must protect you well. Listening to Olivia Davis' words, I reluctantly accepted. Afterward, Olivia Davis and I returned to Oakwood City. When I arrived at the courthouse, a group from the Sterling family was already waiting. The moment she saw me, Victoria Sterling immediately rushed towards me, and angrily shouted at me, "Ethan Miller, I told you to come back. Why didn't you?" I looked at Victoria Sterling indifferently. At that moment, she looked somewhat haggard. Clearly, she had been pushed to the brink these past few days. "Ethan Miller, I'm giving you a chance now. As long as you come back to the company and fix the mess you made, I'll let you off the hook. Otherwise, I will definitely prosecute you. You'll definitely go to jail then." She looked at me and said furiously, "Ms. Sterling, have you forgotten? I didn't sign that contract." I looked at Victoria Sterling coldly and said. Hearing this, a flicker of guilt crossed Victoria Sterling's face, but she quickly composed herself and said, "You clearly signed it. Many people at the company can testify." Victoria Sterling said angrily. Hearing this, I smiled and said, "In that case, please bring all those who can testify." I looked at the judge and said, "Your Honor, you asked me to come here for mediation, but now I'm being slandered. This matter affects me too much. False accusation and deliberate framing. I request that the police be involved." The judge naturally agreed. Hearing how serious I was, Victoria Sterling clearly panicked a little. However, she also knew she definitely had no choice now and could only grit her teeth and call the people over. The moment those individuals arrived, they all started accusing me. I looked at the people in front of me and smiled. These individuals were all former colleagues from the company, and they were also the ones who had constantly badmouthed me after I left. They repeatedly accused me of embezzling funds from the company, and even taking kickbacks from clients. They claimed I had also signed this contract. After waiting for them to finish, I glanced at the bailiffs. They had truthfully recorded the testimony and even had the accusers sign it. "Ethan Miller, now, what do you have to say for yourself?" Victoria Sterling slammed her hand on the table, looked at me, and said furiously. I slowly took out my phone, and then opened the screen. What Victoria Sterling didn't know was that my office had surveillance cameras. The reason for installing surveillance cameras was that when some clients came to negotiate with me, they would always propose various harsh terms. Originally, it was to guard against them. On the very day I was fired, my office became Chadwick Sterling's. In the footage, Chadwick Sterling's conversation with the other party was clearly visible. I could even hear how many percentage points of kickbacks Chadwick Sterling demanded. After handing the evidence to the bailiffs and the judge, I stood up and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is now conclusive. I want to accuse them of false accusation and attempting to frame me." The judge finished reviewing the evidence and turned to look at Victoria Sterling and Chadwick Sterling, whose faces were ashen. "Ethan Miller, I never thought you'd be so insidious." I looked at the people before me and shook my head, saying, "I installed the surveillance cameras to protect myself from clients. I just never imagined that you would use such tactics to threaten me. Ethan, I know you definitely have a way. Please save the company. I promise, I'll go get an abortion right now. After this, I'll live properly with you." Seeing I was about to leave, Victoria Sterling said urgently. As for Chadwick Sterling, she didn't want to deal with him at all now. I pushed Victoria Sterling away and said, "We were over a long time ago, Miss Sterling. As for what happens to you next, you should be very clear." I said, speaking coldly, "For this kind of false accusation, jail time is certain." Now that there was even evidence, they had no way to escape. "Ethan, I truly know I was wrong. Don't leave me." Behind me, Victoria Sterling was crying hysterically, while I left indifferently. I had truly given up on Victoria Sterling. As the news of Victoria Sterling and Chadwick Sterling's arrests came out, Sterling Enterprises instantly collapsed. The creditors swarmed their house, and even Mr. and Mrs. Sterling's mansion was seized. The elderly couple were evicted from their home and left to wander the streets. Olivia Davis informed me that she had already negotiated with the other party. The other party wanted money, so Sterling Enterprises naturally fell into my hands. On the day I acquired Sterling Enterprises, I had Olivia Davis fire half of the company's staff. These individuals were all those who had typically sided with Chadwick Sterling and Victoria Sterling. I had no desire to keep them. Olivia Davis promptly carried out the task. Upon learning that I was the one taking over the company, these people immediately came begging to me, hoping I would show leniency and not fire them. However, I couldn't be bothered to deal with them. I simply informed them that according to the agreement, their severance pay had already been deposited into their bank accounts. Then I had the security team escort them out. A few months later, I integrated the company, and my business grew bigger and bigger. As for Victoria Sterling, while in prison, upon learning that the company had gone bankrupt and her parents were scavenging for survival on the streets, she suffered a severe miscarriage with heavy bleeding due to emotional distress, and died from excessive blood loss on the way to the hospital. As for Chadwick Sterling, I heard he went insane after learning in jail that his only child couldn't be saved. Ultimately, Chadwick Sterling was sent to the state psychiatric hospital. After Mr. and Mrs. Sterling learned that their daughter had also died, unable to bear the shock, on a rainy night, the couple overdosed on a bottle of sleeping pills and committed suicide. As for me, I inherited the family fortune and business, and my life only got better.